Hello, I would like to make a video to talk about rock and roll and the history of rock and roll. Je viens de faire un cours, I just did a class on this topic. First of all, in the early 1900s, there weren't not a lot of technology to do recordings. Uh, So people would buy sheet music and they would cover the songs themselves. They did not have a record connection. The only music that you could hear came from live musicians or themselves playing the piano, like the early Scott Joplin, Chet Atkins, Les Paul, these early guitar players. In New Orleans, there were guitar players that were black, descended from slaves, who wanted to play music instead of work hard in the fields. So they started to play blues. That's the style called blues, and then they moved to New Orleans. They moved from New Orleans to Chicago to try to make a better living. That was after the World War II, and some radios started to play them. Like some of them were BB King, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, uh, many others. A lot of them died young. Some of them had alcohol problems and drug problems. So, but they never got the recognition as much for their music than the people that were covering their songs. So, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones started as a cover band. Elvis Presley was also doing covers of black artists. He was white, but he was singing songs in the style of a black person, and it became very famous. He became very famous. At the time, there was Dean Martin, also Frank Sinatra, before rock, and these were the pop stars that were in Hollywood, or like the singers that people wanted to hear, that were performing other people's songs. Once the people that were listening to these singers, Elvis Presley, for example, there were teenagers, young people, and after Second World War, there was a space for young people to be teenagers, and there was a market. There was the music that went along with it. Uh, Maybe more leisure time for the teenagers, and it was rock and roll music that was associated with that, which was not something that the adults really wanted their kids to listen to, because it has a bad reputation. It was supposedly had bad words, had messages of rebellion. People would usually, I don't know, look messy, that were playing this music, and usually angry or rebelling against the status quo. They were the typical bad boys. So parents would not want their kids to be involved with that. Rock and roll was something that serious people would look down on. They don't want to deal with it. But it was popular, and a lot of the teenagers were listening to it and maybe being influenced by it. And then in the early 60s, the Beatles replaced the success that Elvis Presley had, and they became the big thing. And the Rolling Stones at the same time. A lot of the bands, they were not alone. There's a lot of bands that were doing similar things, especially once they caught up that, oh, this is the type of music that works. So let's do more of that. But so some of the pop idols, teen idols, they were just picked because of their looks, and not necessarily because of their talent, but there were still talented musicians in it. But there was a formula that people that they would use that, oh, okay, well, this good looking person is trying to seduce or trying to show that they're really interested in their audience to get to know them or things like that, but that's just a facade because that's not really, that was just the marketing plan. So so there was a market after Elvis Presley for rock music, and the Beatles, Rolling Stones, these other bands came up. There was some separation from, because there's all this controversy about bad words or in, inciting to delinquents, drug use maybe. Uh, so getting involved in the wrong things. So they were trying to make it as clean as possible. So to take away the sexual content, because the early blues and rock and roll, the early ones, was a lot of it was sexual. So they were taking away the anything that was not appropriate for mainstream to make it more clean. But at the same time, it was taking away from its roots. So maybe maybe it's kind of lacking something. Maybe you need to be the judge, but maybe the clean rock and roll, maybe it's not real rock and roll. So, but then there were the Rolling Stones, for example, was listening to Elvis Presley, and they were listening to pop, to American pop, the Beatles as well, and that's where they got their sound. They were trying to copy American pop, uh, which was Elvis Presley, and that the black artists, they were listening to a lot of the black artists, the Motown, and they were covering. They started out as a cover band, both of them, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and at the end of the 1960s, they became more into psychedelic music, which was trying to emulate a drug trip. So they're into drugs, and uh, that's where the hippie culture happened. Woodstock, these psychedelic rock shows, and it became mainstream. In San Francisco, there were bands like the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, uh, Carlos Santana, and uh, they were doing rock shows, psychedelic rock, and it was with LSD. So people there were taking LSD, and musicians as well. A lot of them, they died from overdose. Uh, People that were getting involved in that environment. Uh, so it was a hippie culture, and they're kind of against the authority and the government that's trying to stop us from enjoying life. And there were themes about anti-war, uh, like social justice or spirituality. They were thinking that they would become more themselves with drugs, and this music was the soundtrack to that. Uh, but then it became more mainstream, and the young person could go and dress like the fashion of these hippies without having the lifestyle. So it was more like something has to do with capitalists to sell goods, to sell products uh, that have that signature without necessarily having the lifestyle that's linked to it. So that was kind of the mainstream big deal back then. and then the rock stations became more popular, so more and more people could listen to it. That's how it happened. Thank you.